What's up everybody, my name is Brenden and this is BigBearB Creative. That's right, we're back again with another second video of a week situation here. I think it's only my second time doing that. I want to try to do this a little bit more. So if you guys have any video ideas that you want me to do, or information about photography, videography, graphic design, any of that kind of stuff, please let me know and I would love to bring you more. Now, so if you have been watching, and you should have been watching, you might be like, what do you mean about videography? We haven't done any videography yet. Well, that's changing today. Today's video, I want to talk to you a little bit about basics of videography, and if you're a photographer or just a basic beginner and want to get into it, there are two specific things about videography and settings on your camera that you need to know about. So those two settings that we're going to talk about today is FPS, or frames per second. You might know that if you're a gamer too. We're going to stick to just videography here on that. But FPS and shutter speed and how they tie into each other and how you have to use them kind of equally to get what, not really what you're looking for, but to get something that is good and appealing to a wide range of audience. So let's start with the frames per second, as you need to know a little bit about that before you can get into the shutter speed. So frames per second, typically most things that you've watched on TV, in the movie theater, anything like that, they're shot in 24 frames per second. Now it's like for those gamers, they're gonna be like 24, oh, that's awful. Sorry, but they typically go for 60 or 120. But for movies, TV, anything like that, that is 24 frames per second. That's what they're all shot in, and it's like that for a particular reason. And that has to do with the shutter speed that we'll get to in just a second. A little bit more than a second. But the other options that you'll most likely have is going to be 30 frames per second, which is a very common one used again. And then 60 and 120, there's also much higher ones, but those are really the basic. If you're a basic beginner, those are going to be the ones that you'll have an option to work with. It might just go up to 60 depending on the camera that you're using, but I'm going to talk about all four of those. So 24, that's the base. You can move up to 30. That's going to give you a few more frames per second, as FPS obviously stands for. But then you're going to go into 60 and 120. Now, basically, when you're using 60 or 120, you're using those in a sort of slow-mo kind of video. And that's going to tie into the shutter speed also that you're using. So let's go into the shutter speed aspect. When you're setting your camera's shutter speed, which is going to be basically, if you're a photographer, you know it's how long the camera's open for it to bring in the light. With the videography, it works a little bit different. That basically, the shutter speed is going to be capturing the motion. So the rule for shutter speed when you're doing anything about videography, you always want to have that be double what your FPS is. So like this video, shot in 24 frames per second, like most TV and most movies. So most cameras, not all, but most cameras don't have double 24 frames, which would be 48, obviously. They don't have those. They typically have 50, or 1/50, which is 1/50th of a second, which is what shutter speed is typically using, is seconds. I guess, yeah, because basically it's just seconds, because they go up to 30 seconds and then it's a bulb mode. So you can go into minutes, but that's really all the camera does. It's a whole different thing. But yeah, so for this specific video, basics of this video, seconds is what we're talking about. So 1/50th is what you're gonna want your camera set at to capture a 24 frame per second video. And that's gonna give you the most natural looking video with motion blur and all that kind of stuff. Now, again, videography, it's an art form just like photography, so there's rules that you could break, and if you want to mess with different things, go ahead and try that, but this is for the basics here. We're going to be sticking with the double rule. So if you're shooting in 30 frames per second, that means you're going to want to have a 1/60th frame, or not frames per second, you're going to want to have 1/60th shutter speed, and then 120, 124, and blah, 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 blah down the line. Basically, you always just want to have that doubled, and that's going to give you the most perfect, I don't know why it took me so long to say that, it's going to give you the most natural looking motion blur. And the reason that you want the most natural looking motion blur, like I had talked about in my photography compositions video, is that we're attracted to things that look most natural to us. So you want to have the most natural look to be, not to be anything, but you want to have the most natural look to reach the most widest audience. And that kind of stuff. So I'm kind of stumbling there, but so you just want to make sure that you are doubling your frames per second with the shutter speed. Jumping back over to frames per second, we're kind of going all over the place here, but frames per second. So we talked a little bit about obviously what the basics is, and then I told you that 60 and 120 are for slow-mo kind of things. I was trying to say slow motion, but then I paused there. Slow motion, slow-mo, yeah. But you're gonna use those two, 60 frames per second and 120 for your slow-mo. And the reason you're gonna do that is because typically most of the time when you're exporting your video into whatever final form it's gonna be on, you're going to export it into a 24 frames per second. So now that you've recorded your video with 120 frames per second or 60 frames per second, that means you have a lot more frames that you filmed that you could scrunch down into that 24 frames. Or when you're slow-mo the video, when you're putting it into slow-mo or adding the slow-mo effect on it, basically you're going to stretch out that 24 frames into the 120 or 60. So basically you're not going to have any stop motion video. It's not going to look like old Western films where basically it's exactly a motion picture where you have a picture and then there's just more pictures and the pictures are moving and whatnot. But yeah, so you want to have the 60 or 120 and slow it down to a certain percentage for each one of the 60 or 120 that you're filming it at if you're exporting into 24 frames per second. You can do the same for 30 frames per second. If you're doing 60 frames per second, you could slow down 120. Basically, if you want to do anything slow-mo, you have to film at FPS that's higher than what you're exporting at. So again, like I said, the basic one is 24. A lot of times when you're shooting slow-mo, you're going to use something like 120 or higher if you have that option. And there was a reason for that, because if you're shooting at 120, that means you could slow that video down to 20% speed and you're not going to lose any frames. It's going to be just as smooth with that motion blur that we talked about, because we're going to set the shutter speed at 1/240th of a second, not 240th, 240th of a second, so that you get that perfect motion blur, but also can slow it down for whatever kind of aspect you're looking to have a slow motion video for. So to summarize everything that I just threw at you all right now, or as long as this video has been, here's what you need to know. Summary of the basics. Shutter speed and your FPS. Double your FPS to get your shutter speed. And whatever shutter speed you have, that's going to give you the correct motion blur depending on what you're exporting at. And the frames per second that you're exporting at, there's different ones for different things. 60 and 120 and above, those are going to be your slow-mo. 30 and 24 are going to be your more basic. Most people use 24, so I would suggest using 24 to look like most people expect to see. If you have any other questions about this, or I definitely didn't describe something the way that you need it to be, or I just completely missed on it, go ahead and let me know down in the comment section below, or you can follow me on any of my social medias, message me there, and I would love to talk to you about this kind of basics of videography, these two things, or any other questions you have. Who knows, you might even give me the next suggestion on the video that we're going to do maybe next week, maybe after, who knows. I'll get to it as soon as I can, so go ahead and message me there. And if you like this video and you learned something, go ahead and hit that like button down below. It really goes a long way in supporting me, this channel's helping promote it to other people who also would like this information. And if you want more information on more advanced things as you go along and progress in your video making, go ahead and hit that subscription button down below, so you can subscribe to this channel to see whenever I upload something new. It might bring something new to you, or like I said, you can tell me down in the comment section below a specific thing you would like to learn, and I'll try my best to help you there. So go ahead and do that. Like, subscribe, comment, and check out my merch. That's right. Down in the description box below, I'll tell you all about my merch. I have t-shirts, apparel, all that kind of stuff, and photo prints, because I'm a photographer, so I gotta sell photo prints. You can check them out. They're either gonna be on my merch page, Teespring for the apparel, Zazzle for the photo prints. There's also a lot more stuff down below too, so go ahead and check that out if you want to. And once again, thank you for watching. Hope you have a great day, and go be creative.